Welcome back, Stitch It family. This is Cory from Stitch It International. And for those of you guys that watched the first couple episodes, you know this is Insider. And it's when we sit down with people that are in the apparel decoration industry or the education industry, and we get to know the people behind the businesses. Because as we all know, no matter how big the business is, there's somebody that operates it. And we're really wanting to dive into who those people are, what their stories are, and how they've found success. Because for a lot of you guys, whether you're experienced or whether you're just now starting in the industry, you're going to have questions. And somebody that can answer probably a lot of those questions through experience and education is my guest today. She is known online and around her circle as the Machine Embroidery Geek. And this is Julia Griffey. Griffey, I apologize. So I'll let you introduce yourself, give a little bit of your background. So welcome to the show.
Hi, everybody, family of Stitch It. My name is Julie Griffey, and I run this site called Machine Embroidery Geek. I kind of gave the name to myself, but because it was available, the domain was available. And I started a blog all about machine embroidery about, oh gosh, it's been like 10 years. And I also teach at a university, teach at Webster University, and my discipline is interactive media production. So I was always interested in blogging, and I built tons of websites. Mostly I had built websites for other people and kind of had this moment where I felt like, what's the point of building a website if nobody's going to come to it? And so I was very interested in the power of content creation and blog creation. So I thought, well, I'm just going to start blogging all about embroidery. And I was really interested in learning to digitize at the time too. So I just started writing all about it. And it was really a terrible blog, at least at the beginning, because everything was like, oh, here's another thing I did. Oh, and by the way, today, here's what I made. And I made this and I made that. And it was just not, it was really more for me and not really for my audience. And then about, I think, kind of when the pandemic started happening, I decided, I thought there was a lot of potential in that content, which is a little bit ironic because when I really took an audit of the content that was there, I scrapped a lot of it. But I thought that there was potential in the idea. And so I started really developing content that was more for people who were trying to get started in embroidery. And yeah, I cranked out a lot of content during COVID, and it really grew from there.
Well, I think a lot of people, and I've heard it in the past couple episodes, that probably one of the biggest things in this industry is the lack of education. Like you said, you wanted to get information out there, but then when you look for references and like what other people were doing, there's not a whole lot out there. And so, it's kind of a blessing and a curse. You've got the kind of curse of, hey, like, how do I get started? I don't know what to build off of.
Yeah.
But then it's the blessing of, hey, I can kind of make this my own thing and stuff. So you gave yourself the Machine Embroidery Geek name. And what was it that you decided that you were like, okay, so this is how I'm going to do this, is how I'm going to present myself?
Well, what I wanted to do that was different is I saw a lot of embroidery designs that were out there that were really kind of fussy, ugly designs. And I just wanted simpler things. In the last 10 years, there's just been an explosion of digitizers. And I aspire to be like some of the other people out there now, but I wasn't seeing that 10 years ago. And so I wanted modern, simple designs that I would want to stitch out on my kids' clothing at the time. Now they're too big for a lot of my nonsense, but so that was what I was really trying to achieve. And I knew that if I could digitize, then I could make what I liked.
Okay, and we've talked about digitizing and stuff, and it is quite a bit of a technology, and you can find like a dime a dozen digitizers. So for people that maybe they've been embroidering and they need somebody to digitize, what do you think would be some of those areas to focus on? Like, okay, how do I recognize a good digitizer?
Yeah.
How do I recognize somebody that does quality work? What are some of those things?
Yeah. Well, I always have imposter syndrome when people say good digitizing, because then I'm like, am I good? But so actually, okay, I'll get back to your question. But actually, at the Everything Embroidery Market trade show, which if you don't know about that, it's a really fun event. I was just there teaching some classes, and the people that organize the show are really awesome and wonderful. And so, and they always invite me back. So I always try to do nice things for them, and they needed somebody to digitize the show logo, because people that go to that show, they're fanatics. They want the current show's logo, and then they stitch it out on their bags, on their t-shirts, on their sweatshirts, and they all show up at the conference stitching out wearing the year's logo.
Makes sense.
So anyway, I digitized it for them. It's just to be nice and put good karma out into the world. And I was really patting myself on the back when I was running into people at the show who had stitched out my design they were wearing. I'm like, I did that one. How'd you like it? How'd it stitch for you? Yeah. And like, oh, it was really good. And I was like, okay, good.
So you start to ask questions. You're like, so what do you think of the design? Yeah. Like you're asking for feedback, and then at the end, depending on the feedback, you can be like, oh, I did that design. And you're like,
yeah, I mean, I should be confident now. I've done it long enough. I know what I'm doing. But what makes a good design? I mean, first of all, what people don't understand a lot of times is they think that digitizing, you can just take a photograph and turn it into an embroidery design. But the nature of a photograph, it's comprised of millions of colors, right? I mean, otherwise it wouldn't look like a photograph. Mm-hmm. We need to have that kind of that realism to have it reflect reality. But when you look at something that's been digitized and that's going to be stitched out on an embroidery machine, we don't have a million thread colors on our machines. So we have to make decisions about, well, how can I translate this into something that's going to stitch out nicely? So you can, a computer can do it, and that's called auto-digitizing. Mm-hmm. I think that's the term, auto-digitizing. But computers sometimes aren't super smart about making those kinds of decisions. Mm-hmm. As we've seen with like AI, for example. Like sometimes AI is awesome and sometimes it just writes garbage. Yep. So the same thing goes when you're auto-digitizing something. So it has to like actually look realistic, first of all. Second, in not too many colors. I think you have to have some consideration for how can I reduce the number of colors to actually have it still look good, but not be just flat and uninteresting. So I think it's really kind of a compromise between those things. Also, you don't want like these big, long jump stitches all over the place. That becomes a pain. If you're on a newer, fancier machine that cuts your jump stitches, sometimes it's not such a big deal. But if you don't have that, it's a real pain for cleanup. But at the same time, like sometimes I make a conscious decision to make the jump be bigger so that it's easier to trim. Because if you're going to have a jump stitch, you make it these little teeny tiny ones that are hard to get into. They're going to be noticeable, but they're hard to get into and trim. Maybe it should just be a longer jump stitch, which will be easier to get rid of.
That makes sense, because then you have more to actually grab a hold of and clip
exactly.
out. Then,
so little things like that.
Okay.
Start and end points that flow naturally. Like, if you have an area of green here and then here and then here, you don't want to go here, 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 jump all over the place. So, and variety of textures, variety of stitch angles, thinking about applying colors in a way that you're applying the strongest contrast to the most important element, which is like just basic graphic design principles, things like that.
Okay. Before we get into a little bit of your experience, one of the things we talked about before is how it's important to note like where on the apparel, whether it's on your chest, whether it's on a hat, that changes how it's digitized. And like I've said before, like I'm pretty new to the embroidery world, and so that was kind of a surprise to me. I hadn't really even ever considered it. So real briefly, can you explain why you need to make that change and like what the difference would be in those types of designs?
Yeah, so when you're in, I think it's not so much the hat itself, it's more of if you're going to incorporate foam or any kind of riser in the stitching, it's going to puff it up, and so you're going to need a little bit more room in your stitches. I actually don't have any experience specifically digitizing for foam, just because I told you before I'm not crazy about that aesthetic. And I think that, if your design is small enough on a hat, it's not going to make a difference really with the digitizing, because you're not experiencing a lot of curvature. But if you do have a lot of curve, then there are some accommodations that a digitizer would make to make it like lay really nicely, knowing that it's going to go on a curved surface as opposed to a flat surface. One thing though that I think about, and it's not so much digitizing, but in terms of choosing a design, that design that was on the back of that jacket that I just saw a little while ago, it's large, it's super dense, there's a lot of colors. I would never stitch that out on anything flimsy. You really need to have a nice like a solid material and solid backing for something like that. So it's more about choosing the appropriate design for the fabric that you're going to be stitching on.
Okay, cool. Yeah, like that was just one of those things. I assumed it was the curvature, but
Yes.
since I didn't really know, I figured I'd talk to the Machine Embroidery Geek.
Well, you know who you should really talk to, because the Machine Embroidery Geek kind of making that up a little bit, but what you should really talk to is somebody who does digitizes a lot for hats. I don't know who digitizes your designs, but
that was actually Bill Garvin did that one. He created that design, so
okay,
that's probably why it's so pretty, is because Bill did it.
Yes. Well, I mean, like there might be he would probably be able to elaborate on the technique for the curvature. I just don't do tons of hats, and I don't tend to do. I've done stuff for hats, but anything really big where the curvature is going to be a problem.
I was just curious. But I did want to get into a little bit of your experience. I know that you said that you teach at a college, but before we started recording, you were talking about some other projects that you've done with media and stuff. So could you dive into some of your experience with some of the things that you've done there?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. You know, my life experience, I think, is very full circle. Even though I teach interactive media and media production, I grew up sewing and making a whole bunch of clothes, and doing applique, like freehand applique, and I have a master's degree in apparel design, actually, and then I did an MFA in design. So this whole connection between the apparel and the media is just kind of like just revolving back into areas of my interests that have happened again and again. But recently, I did a project where I interviewed people. This was for a university project where I interviewed people that had started small businesses in kind of unlikely places. And I interviewed about 12 people, and it was just so fascinating that people who, what the theme, I think, after talking to so many people, was that they didn't have a lot going for them before they got their business started. Like, they really didn't. And they all kind of lived in really unlikely places where you wouldn't think that it's like a creative hub. But that almost kind of helped build their vision, because there weren't a lot of distractions around where they were. Anyway, after I did those interviews, I picked what I thought was the most compelling stories. And one was an illustrator in Arkansas, Springdale, Arkansas, which is kind of near Bentonville. And she had licensed her illustrations to Moda Fabrics and Crate and Barrel, and even since we went down and filmed her and interviewed her and filmed her space. Even after that, her business has grown. I follow her on Instagram, and she's done a whole bunch of cool things after that. Then we went to a guy in Indiana who was making these beautiful like art pieces out of bugs. And that was fascinating. And then the third guy was in Omaha, Nebraska, and he made these artifact bags. He made these handcrafted bags, and they've all done amazing things. Their business has grown so well. But the funny thing was, every time we showed up, my collaborator, I had interviewed the people, and I was just, okay, we're going to go to Omaha. And we show up at all of their spaces, and sometimes I'm not the best planner in the whole world. And we walk in there, and my pal, he goes, "Did you know it was going to be this beautiful?" And I'm like, no, I had no idea. And each one of their spaces were just captured them, were just so beautiful and showed up on film so well, so nicely.
That's awesome. And part of the perk of having kind of a little smaller area like that is you can kind of really show off your personality.
Yes.
And, that's one of the things I've noticed just in traveling and talking to different people, because I had a podcast before this. So I've talked to quite a few people in interviews and stuff. And it's when you deal with those people that kind of the humble beginnings, like they start from very little, like not only is it more of an appreciation for the success that they have,
yes,
but a lot of times, like you said, when there's not that outside influence, that's when you really see a lot of that personality shine through. And so let's say that you've got somebody that's wanting to start getting into the apparel decoration, whether it's embroidery, transfer, just anything like that.
Right.
What do you think would be a good way to get them started where it's like, hey, you know what? Show some of that personality. Like what are ways that people can show their personality through something as simple as embroidery?
Well, that's an interesting question, because my business mainly focuses on helping people learn kind of the basics. And I do give some business and marketing advice just because I have that life experience. I don't have the experience of running an embroidery business, although I'm kind of getting into that right now. So what I have seen with people who've been very successful is, well, first of all, it just seems like there's a ton of work out there. And what I've seen with people who are successful is people who just put their stuff out there, who are clever about their marketing. And I've learned so much from the people that I've, like, digital business cards and just little things like that. But in terms of developing a style and a product line, I think one way to get started is to look at some of these digitizers and the designs. What are you drawn to? What do you think is attractive? And focus on kind of a niche, at least beginning. And I say that because I met a woman recently who had a small embroidery business, and she does a lot of linens and more high-end looking stuff. And she just does a lot of single initial designs. And she said, I like single initials because I have them all loaded in on my machine, and there's no setup on the computer. So if it's a B, I got the B. Just put it on my machine, I load it up, it's right there. So, she's kind of become known for these really pretty single initial designs, like linen covers for tissue boxes. I know that sounds really silly, but like with a beautiful B on it or whatever that single initial is. And I thought that's really smart. Like, she's just sort of
found that little
niche,
thing.
And she aligns her business's aesthetic with the digitizer she really likes. So when we were at the trade show, she's like, I want to go talk to that company over there because I love their designs. I use them a lot. And so that's kind of been sort of her hallmark.
Like, we have a influencer that we kind of work with, and she helps us create content and stuff sometimes. And she kind of did the same thing where she embroiders on like Coach bags and handbags and things, which it's a difficult medium to embroider on.
Yes, and scary too, because that's expensive if you mess them up.
Very expensive. And so there's obviously a very, very limited market for that. But she found that that's what she was good at. And even though it seems like a limited market, because she was able to kind of find that focus, she probably hasn't had any trouble finding sales or anything like that, because like you said with the tissue box, like how many people are out there really making tissue box covers?
Yes.
And so if you find that little thing where it's like, okay, that's my thing, that's what I enjoy, it helps out a lot. And I think probably for me, it's a lot of it is people want genuine, like they want to be able to see a genuine human behind that design or whatever, because we've all seen the designs that are, it's like it looks almost corporate or it just looks mass produced or whatever, but then you have those unique individual designs. And I think it's important to really find yourself and find out who you are before you kind of expand into, okay, let me tell the world who I am. And a lot of that is just sticking true to who you are.
Well, some people complain about Etsy too. I mean, and Etsy has its pros and cons, but I think it's a wonderful way to get started because they're bringing the audience to you. And so it's a way to put yourself out there, get your stuff there, and see what people like, what people don't like, and then expand, then open your own site, because you don't want to build your entire livelihood on Etsy, because some things on Etsy are outside of your control. Like somebody might get mad at you for something that may not have been really your fault, and you get bad reviews, and then your Etsy shop's gone. So you really need to use that as kind of a stepping stone to actually, your main storefront or your main. But I think it's a wonderful way to get started.
I would agree with that, because, even like with yourself, you said that you started your website as a blog post, and it's not even fully like an e-commerce site, but it's just kind of, you've got that natural evolution of like, oh, okay, now I can use this platform and I can kind of expand and grow from there. But it took that initial like, okay, like this is the stepping stone.
Yes.
And I think that for me, another thing to consider when you're starting out is, how large you want your audience to be. Because I was an artist by trade. I've done commercial art and personal, like fine art and stuff. And somebody had asked one time in one of the Facebook groups I'm in, they said, how do you really like find a larger audience? And I gave the answer that was like, it's one of those things where if you want to be an artist, paint for yourself. If you want to be a commercial artist, paint for your customer. And it's almost the same thing when it comes to embroidery and stuff. Like the decision between being a hobbyist and being like, okay, I want to make a living at this, is like you said with your blog site. At first you started out, you're making the blog post more for yourself than anything, but then you reached that point where it was like, if I'm going to reach more people, I need to look at what people are looking for. So if, say, somebody is at that kind of stage where like they're wanting to get bigger, but they've really been kind of doing it on their own, where would you suggest maybe they start trying to find clients or anything? Because I know with you yourself, you said that you're an affiliate for several places and people are now coming to you, but you had to know who to look out to be an affiliate for first. What are some of those points of research?
Well, I think if your goal is to get more embroidery business, so my goals are a little bit different as primarily an educator, but if my goal is to get more embroidery business, I think that, and this may be obvious advice, but social media platforms that are visual in nature, like Instagram, TikTok now, but Instagram, Pinterest are the big ones, because a lot of the things that we make as embroiderers, for example, like beautiful tissue box covers, you don't know that that's what you're shopping for. You're not going to put a Google search in that says, I want pretty tissue box covers with the letter single initial monogram that's ornate. That's just not something we search for, but we see it on Instagram or we see it on Pinterest and we're like, that's a perfect gift for my mom. So really taking advantage of visual social media. I don't think that Twitter is not a visual social media, but for creators, these are great tools to share your work. And also, just so many people that I've talked to in the embroidery business, and they say, I don't even advertise, it's all word of mouth. So once you do good work, that message will travel.
I agree. And I think that, me and Bill talked about that as well, where it's like, if you treat people right and you produce quality work, the word will travel. But at the same time, like you said with Etsy, where it's like one bad review, and because more people are willing to talk about the things that they don't like more than the things that they do. And so it really is important to reach people kind of where they are on their growth journey. And that's one thing I'm glad that you brought it up with social media, is there's this common feeling that like, oh, I have to be on all the social medias, but some social media just isn't suited for other business. And so like, let's use the example that you use, Pinterest, Instagram, great visual platforms and stuff like that. But if you're not doing, say, videos, TikTok might not be the right option for you. And so you do better to kind of reserve your energy for that gets you the best thing and not necessarily cast the widest net. So when you are growing, like you specifically, when you're growing, what are some of the things that you've been looking at to where it's like, okay, now it's time for the next step? Like, I've kind of reached this point. Do you set goals? Do you just like have a gut feeling? Like, what's your specific process for when it's time to grow?
Well, I've got probably a laundry list of things that I'm working on for growth. Like, I recently launched I have a couple of Embrilliance courses. One's in Essentials and one's in Enthusiast. I know I need to do a Stitch Artist course. That's the digitizing component. Embrilliance and Enthusiast are more about editing. And this is all, how do you know? I hear it from the people who come to my site. Like, love the class. When are you going to do this? So if you just listen, you can get a lot of ideas for growth.
Okay.
What else is on the agenda? I actually invented this little device, which is really cool. It's for single needle home machines, and it's called the hoop skirt. And the way that it works is, I'm plugging my product here.
Okay.
See,
nothing wrong with that.
The way that it works is it pops into the embroidery hoop and it holds back like the baby onesie, so that baby onesies are hard to embroider on, especially if you have a single needle home machine. But it holds back the excess fabric, because that area is so small and so tight that you need a lot of people use tape to get it out of the way so you can actually stitch a design on the front of a onesie or like a little t-shirt. So right now I just have it made for the little brother 4x4-inch embroidery hoop. And I've been trying it out a lot myself, but working on other models. So I really need to market that product. So the question is where to focus your energy, because there's so many things that you can do.
And I think that that's probably the biggest challenge for anybody is like
Yeah.
there's just so many things out there nowadays. It's just like so many opportunities, so many different things, avenues that you want to try and stuff. And so it really is easy to kind of get overwhelmed by it a lot.
Yeah, and saying yes to things
Yep.
that you're like, I was going to exhibit at an upcoming trade show, and I recently backed out, and it was the most liberating feeling in the whole world, because I thought, like, this, my whole summer is going to be taken by preparing for this, and I don't really see a great return on investment for me. I'd much rather focus on working on my product and making videos and demonstrating this and working on new partnerships, and not something that just didn't feel right.
I think actually that's a really important point to make, because you don't always have to say yes to every opportunity.
Yeah.
It's very easy, again, like with the art background for myself, I shared on one of my social medias this painting that somebody had done. It was a fantastic painting, like a beach scene, and the water just looked realistic. And I made the comment on the caption, I said, man, I have a lot of respect for people that can paint water like that. Water's not an easy surface to paint.
Yeah.
And one of my other artist friends, I was like, oh, if you want to take some time, I can teach you how to do it. And I kind of like politely declined, and they were like, oh, I'm offering to do it for free. It's like, yeah, but I don't see myself ever painting waves.
Yeah.
So even though like I think it's impressive that other people can do it, like in that moment I had to decide, like, is that something that's worth my time and my energy and my effort? And so I think kind of learning that skill of, okay, this matches my skill set, this matches my interest.
Yeah. And is it going to help propel the business in a new way? I think you have to think about that all the time. And as I get older too, my time gets more precious.
Yep.
And I'm just like, I don't want to be worried about that, And I am a yes person. I say yes to a lot of crazy things. I'm here, right?
That's what I was gonna say. You're out in the middle of Patton, Missouri.
So that's so for me to say no is a big deal.
That's an important lesson to learn, I think.
Yeah.
So, we've talked a little bit about your experience, but overall, if you could describe yourself, elevator pitch, what you do, what you offer, 30 seconds.
Oh, I can do it in like 2 seconds. Inspiration and help for machine embroiderers. That's what Machine Embroidery Geek is all about. I try some crazy stuff out, and embroidering on my shoes on a single needle machine, or a camping chair, or like holding it up while so I try a lot of stuff. I try to be really helpful. I respond to people's questions. It's just a lot of silly fun. I make sexy architect tote bags.
You do?
Yeah.
I saw that on your Facebook. I had to ask you about that this morning.
Yes.
We were, for those of you guys that are listening and curious about this, you quick backstory.
Yes. So my friend is an architect who discovered a sexy architect Halloween costume, and she said she didn't need it because she's already a sexy architect. So she really wanted a sexy architect tote bag, and that's what I embroidered.
See, we laugh about it, but like that's the type of thing, like when you can like make those connections with people and make fun stuff, and like people enjoy stuff like that. Nobody likes the boring life. And so I think one thing, looking through your website, looking through your social media and all that stuff, like it's fun. Like you exude like just fun and enjoying life. And like you said, the older you get, the more you really value those things that you have in life. And I think for me, at least, probably the biggest thing is just like, don't take life too seriously.
Yes.
And even in business, like if you have fun doing what you're doing, and you enjoy what you do, it's not as much work.
Exactly.
And for I think a lot of people that get into this industry, they get into apparel decoration and stuff, it's not, at the end of the day, it's not because, hey, I want to make a ton of money. It's mostly because this is something I enjoy, or I'm a creative person and I want to express myself. And so you see both sides of it. You see that creative fun side, but then you also see like, hey, you're a college professor. So how do you kind of bridge that gap where it's like, okay, hey, I can have fun in a career while I'm doing this, even if it's something that's like serious? Like, how do you kind of insert your own personality into that type of stuff?
Well, it's hard not to. I mean, I teach in a discipline that I thought becoming a college professor would be the greatest job in the whole world, because A, summer's off, B, just being paid to indulge your own curiosity. So for example, one of the things we're talking about is what I'm trying to push forward to kind of link more of what my embroidery and my my day job teaching is coming up with a certificate program called digital fabrication. So it will be kind of, and I think we're going to do it in conjunction with the graphic design department. So it's about like 3D printing and laser cutting and taking the digital world and turning it into the physical world. And embroidery fits right in there with all of those different mediums. So I think that would be a really cool program. And that's one way I'm trying to bridge the fun and the actual real work together.
Yeah. Excuse me. You said that and you were like, oh, I was going to be a college professor because I thought it was fun. And I was like, maybe you haven't had some of the college professors I've had, but not all of them see it that way.
It is pretty fun to get paid to just pursue your own curiosity. I mean, I'm trying to work on a course right now that's global media production, which is where we learn the basic tools of media production, but in a exotic locale. So there's just lots of fun things to come up with. And where I teach at Webster, they really support a lot of crazy ideas.
And, I think that's probably one of the biggest things is having an employer that's willing to let you kind of explore those things. Because I think we've all had that job where it's like, you have to go, you have to clock in, you have to do this, you have to clock out, and that's it. Like you're not allowed to have any personality. And so I think that's probably one of the things for me that the embroidery industry as a whole, like here at Stitch It, I've talked to, RJ from Creo and Bill and all that stuff. It's an industry that allows you to express yourself and to be creative and like to really have fun with what you do more so than other industries. Yeah. And there is a business aspect to it. Obviously somebody has to run the numbers and somebody has to know, how everything works. But I think probably the biggest draw for me with the apparel decoration industry is just that ability that you're really only limited by your own creativity and your own kind of desire to express yourself, because no two embroidery designs are the same, just like no two people are the same. Yeah. And so for you, if you had to put like a name on what your aesthetic or your preferred creative style is, how would you describe your work?
That's a good question, because I do, I think about this actually. I do, well, I can tell you about my own personal fashion style, which I think is sort of boho athletic, sort of, is the kind of, I like things that are a little bohemian, a little bit hippie, but also kind of sporty. Gotcha. So I think it's sort of, and then there's a little bit of preppy thrown in there, but more in my embroidery than the way that I dress. But I would say bohemian, modern, sporty, I think is more my aesthetic.
So a hippie that runs a lot.
Yeah, exactly. That is totally it. Actually, though, I have a knee problem, so I'm mostly swimming.
Oh, okay. So speed walking.
No, well, swimming and yoga. But yes, that is exactly it. The hippie that runs a lot. I like that.
So now you'll be the machine embroidery hippie geek that runs a lot.
Yeah.
You can pass on the royalties to me on that one.
Yeah. My daughter said, I went to college at UC Berkeley, which is known for being a pretty hippie place. And my daughter said, is that when my mom became a hippie? She asked my dad that. And my dad goes, oh, she was a hippie long before that, honey.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, excuse me. We've covered actually, quite a bit of different topics and everything. But if you could have probably like one thing, free microphone to share with the world of like something that you think is important to know, not necessarily just in the industry, but just in general with business, life, your own experiences, what type of advice would you give somebody that's just starting out, maybe 17, 18 years old, just jumping into the workforce, trying to decide what to do?
Oh, that's a good question. You're giving me some good questions. I would say perfect is the enemy of the done. Just take a risk and do some things and put some things out there. You can always course correct. I think about things that I did even last year, and I'm like, that wasn't perfect, but it was done, and it was keep moving on, keep improving, move on to the next thing. I mean, you can get hung up forever in trying to make the perfect decision, and sometimes decisions are going to be arbitrary, and that's okay. You just have to make a decision and you got to move on and get on to the next interesting thing, because you can dwell and just sort of wallow in these things forever and ever and ever. And it's like, okay, that's going to be the logo for this product, or that's going to be the name of it. It may not be the best name, but that's what we're going with right now, and let's keep going,
I think that's actually probably the best advice that you could give, is where it's like, you know what, hey, sometimes things aren't going to work out perfect. Sometimes, you're not going to get that time to really work, especially whether it's the embroidery business. You see it, I'm sure, all the time as a college instructor.
Yeah.
Me on a graphic design background, where it's like you've got a deadline, or you have to get this done.
Yes.
And it's really easy to get in your own head and be like, oh, maybe it's not good enough, or maybe like I could have just adjusted this or whatever. But I was actually having a conversation with my daughter the other day. She's in college, and she was stressing herself out over one of these assignments and trying to go above and beyond because she wanted to like really put her best foot forward. And I told her, I said, for right now, like, let's just focus on, okay, the assignment says this, this, and this. Did you meet those needs? And the answer is yes. Then okay, like you have met the needs of the assignment. There's no reason to stress yourself out more over it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that like a lot of young people now, or even just people that are starting a new career, they jump in, they want to be the best. They want to do all these fantastic things and create these masterpieces. And it's like, okay, but it's okay to learn and take time to learn those basics. And that's what you teach with your Machine Embroidery Geek, is like, okay, hey, before you can make these great, huge designs, like let's get that foundation started. So a lot of times it's kind of that self-humility where you have to be like, oh, okay, like it's okay if it's not perfect. It's okay to learn.
Well, and getting some feedback from friends too, which could also boost your confidence. I mean, I have an army of friends that are always getting pictures. Do you like this? Do you think I should do this in different color? Do you like this? I was working on this single initial design, which is kind of like this kind of circle bracket and a letter inside. And I've been stitching them out on these corduroy tote bags as high school graduation gifts, and doing them in the colors of wherever they're going to college. And I think they're super cute. But something was bothering me about one of them. And I sent a picture to my friends, and they're like, well, the letter needs to be more bold than the bracket because it's not standing out enough. And then I was doing 2 different colors in the bracket, and the whole thing was just too busy. So I went back and I changed my design, and I thickened up my letters a little bit, and I did the bracket in a solid color, and I sent it back so much better, and I was really disappointed when the review that I was getting from my friends was not that great. But when I went back and I did it again, it's just, accepting the feedback, not being afraid to revise things. Now I've got to go back and thicken up about 10 letters that I've already digitized, which is going to take me a little while, but whatever, I'll feel much better about it going forward.
I feel like that's probably good life advice in general, is the ability to take critique.
Oh, yeah.
And being able to be like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to get my feelings hurt over this because, that person may know something that I don't know. Or, we all fall in love with our own work, or we all hate our work. It's one of 2 extremes. Never are we really just like,
yes,
it's good enough. It's either we want it to be perfect, or we think it's the worst thing we've ever made. And sometimes when you have that mindset and you get that little bit of critique, like you want to get your feelings hurt, and you want to kind of fold it on yourself a little bit. So I think bringing up that point of like getting critique and valuing and understanding that, hey, that person's not attacking me. They're looking at it from an outside set of eyes. And I think that friends, great way to do that. Another thing that I would suggest, and I'm sure that you've probably seen in your professional career, is the value and the importance of networking and talking to other people already in the industry. Because, for instance, like the embroidery industry, I'm talking to you, I'm learning things that I've never known before. And like I work in the embroidery industry, but that doesn't mean I know everything. And so kind of having that humble nature of, okay, I can take critique, I can learn from it, and then putting it into action makes a huge difference.
And not being, I've read something about, there's enough for all of us. So for example, all people that do embroidery, I connected with these women that were all coming to this event from different places, but they had met each other before on Instagram. And so they all got together for this dinner, and I got connected with them all too. And so now I follow them all on Instagram. One is the tissue box lady. One of them makes these beautiful sashes that go on wreaths in your, like on your door, and it's a sash and it has like a custom fancy letter, and she embroiders like a dog breed that is the family dog. And I mean, all sorts of crazy things, but they're really beautiful and tasteful and everything. So I collaborated with her and wrote a blog post about how do you make these things. And she gave me a little bit of advice. And I wrote it all up, and then I referred back to all of her stuff. Like, she's the master. Go look at her stuff. But the point is that I'm not out there to compete against her. There's enough ideas in the world of embroidery that we can all coexist, and we can take some ideas, like the whole idea of the single initial designs being so easy to produce. That got me thinking about, like, well, how can I digitize more cool single initials, because they're going to be easy to and quick to stitch out, and I don't have to do any customizing. So not people who you think are your competitors, there are ways that you can coexist with them and actually help each other, you know?
I agree. I think collaboration over competition any day.
Yes.
And that was something that me and Bill was also talking about, where it's, say you have a small shop and a large shop. Well, the large shop may not want to take the small orders because they almost have too many resources, but the small shop can't handle the large orders. So if instead of looking at each other as competition, if they collaborate, it's like, oh, okay, well, any small orders I can refer them to you, or any large orders I can refer them to you. And you're not going to achieve that with that spirit of competition. No. So you have to, like you said, draw that inspiration from other people, but also be willing to network and learn and talk to other people within the industry. Speaking of that, we're going to be closing in on time pretty soon. So before we close out, for people that want to reach out to you, learn from you, find all that stuff, where are you at on social media on the internet?
Good question. My website is machineembroiderygeek.com. So it's just spelled like it sounds, Machine Embroidery Geek. And then on Instagram, Machine Embroidery Geek. I don't know, some weird thing on Pinterest. I think it's Mash Embroidery Geek, maybe because I was character limit over, but they're all linked up on my website. So that's the easiest way to find me.
And then I assume you got contact forms on there and stuff like that. Oh, yeah, sure. So just in case anybody was wanting to know what all services you offer, if you was to give kind of a rundown of the types of things you can find on your website, what type of stuff do you have?
Well, a lot of embroidery designs and fonts, and I have a bunch of courses. So I have courses in just a very basic, learn how to do machine embroidery. It's called Master the Machine, Learn How to Embroider Like a Boss. And that's a very, very comprehensive course for people that are brand new and are just getting their first home embroidery machine. I have some ebooks. I have a couple of devices, like, for example, the hoop skirt I was telling you about earlier, and I'm starting to launch a couple of kits. So it would come with a few pieces of hardware and a set of designs to make like a little handbag or simple machine embroidery projects, kind of all in one. That some is digital, that comes to you, as soon as you buy it, and then the pieces would come in the mail. So those are the kinds of things I offer.
So, I mean, pretty much a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything, that's right.
And maybe even more soon. We were talking about expanding business and
yes,
stuff.
We are.
You never know,
yes, possibly, a few embroidery machines. Yeah. Just order a couple designs and then just...
Next thing you know, you come back to the website and there's machines available. Who knows?
Yes, exactly.
That's part of that growth that we were talking about.
Yeah.
And, on that note, we are going to go ahead and close out for the day. Thank you so much for joining us. I think it's been great sitting here.
Yeah.
I probably honestly could have sat here and talked forever, but schedules and you're a busy person and you got to travel and be an Uber for your family. And all that stuff.
Exactly.
So I guess we'll let it slide.
Well, I feel the same way. I could go down the whole laundry list of silly embroidery projects that I've done over the years.
Over the years, I'm sure you've done plenty. But on that note, we will go ahead and get out of here. So this was the Machine Embroidery Geek. I'll get I messed up your name at the beginning.
Oh, well, my real name is actually Julia, but most people call me Julie.
Yeah, that's what I said. So we'll act like that part didn't happen, and we'll just Machine Embroidery Geek, Julia Griffey. So you got it right that time. On behalf of Stitch It International, I'm Cory, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Thanks.